Yeah, wonderful. I see a lot of colleagues on the call. It's nice to see you, Matt. And also our speaker, one of our speakers for next week is on the call. Hi, David. Wonderful.
Hi, everybody.
Can I ask what it is that you have going on next week? I know you've mentioned it a couple of times.
Yeah, Brooke, do you want to?
Well, yeah.
Or
more than a thing. So we have several programs, but one program that we've been working on, that Abby and I have been working on, is a talk next Friday at this time at 10:30 on Robert Ryman's Philadelphia Prototype, which is one of two site-specific installations that the artist created. One is at Dia Beacon and the other is at PAFA. So we're going to have a few of our colleagues talking about that work in particular.
Thank you.
Of course, we'd love you to join us.
Thanks.
I was just pulling up the link, so I just dropped that into the chat for anyone who's interested. It's now on our website. But John, Brooke, Julie, I think we might get started.
Sure.
Emily on here yet, but I want to make sure since this is a pretty short event that we have, I want to make sure we spend most of it with you all. So I wanted just to quickly welcome everyone. So excited to have you all here with us on the call. I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs here at PAFA. And I want to start today's call the way I start almost every program, and just a huge thank you to all of our PAFA members who are here. I recognize many of you on the call today. So thank you for being here and for helping us keep PAFA strong. And if you haven't already, please consider joining our membership. And I'll drop the link in the chat later for that. Just some quick things, some Zoom etiquette, because we are such a huge call. There's already 130 of us here. You might have noticed I went ahead and muted everyone. I'm going to ask that you stay on mute, except for our speakers. Feel free to please unmute yourself. That you stay on mute for the call unless you're actively asking a question. And we are going to have time towards the end where we ask questions. We do want to hear from you in other ways too, excuse me. We have the chat already going, so feel free during the call if you have questions about the artist, about the conversation, helpful links, those sort of things, feel free to drop them in the chat here, which has already started, but I'll write something for those of you who are just popping in, so it'll pop up on your screen. Some other quick little things. You might notice that we are already recording. So if you can't see yourself on like a little icon on the screen, that means your video is muted. So at the bottom of your screen, next to your mute button, next to that is a camera icon. Feel free to turn that on if you'd like to be seen. I also mentioned that because we are recording today's events, we do share these on our YouTube channel within 24 or 48 hours of the program concluding. So if you'd like to not be on the event, you're welcome to mute your camera and you won't be included. I'll also mention that if you're not actively asking a question, you're not normally on the video, but just in case, that's something to be aware of. Other things are we are going to be showing some wonderful images today. I know Brooke has a PowerPoint she's going to be sharing. So I'd recommend, basically Zoom has two views, so you can see things in speaker view, like if I'm the big head at the bottom of your screen, or Brooke is mine right now. That's the option I would recommend keeping it for the first half of the program, especially while we share images. And then once we get into conversation mode, if you want to switch in the upper right-hand corner of your screen where it says gallery view, you can switch between those two options and see all of our speakers at once, as well as some of our great crowd here today. So I think that's all for me. I'm now so excited to hand it over to our director of the museum, Brooke Davis Anderson. And I do, of course, want to thank our special guests for being here with us. We've got John Grieg, Julie Siglin, and Emily Zilber from the Wharton Esherick Museum. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And Brooke, I'm going to unmute you.
Thanks, Abby, so much. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Brooke, and it's been so rewarding to do these culture and coffee breaks. So cheers to all of us this morning. A good Friday. A safe Friday. I'm appreciating seeing some of our participants wearing masks. I hope everybody's practicing physical distancing and taking good care of themselves and our communities. You know, obviously with culture and coffee, while the museum is closed, we're really trying to bring the museum to all of us through these online programs. I'm missing the galleries and the artwork in our museum so much, and I'm sure that all of us are. I'm sure that those of you who are here to support the Wharton Esherick Museum are really missing those divine spaces and his incredible artwork and not being able to visit those right now. So this is a great way to connect, and a great way to connect about artists that we all care deeply about. I want to give a special shout out to our members. So if there's any members on the call, and if you feel like letting yourself be known, you can use your reaction button and give us a thumbs up. Same with the Wharton Esherick Museum. Any members of the Wharton Esherick Museum, make yourself known as part of our community while we get started. So this week we're going to chat about when artists pivot, and specifically Wharton Esherick, and how when he faced challenges or changes in his life, he in a way pivoted. Pivoting is something that a lot of us in the cultural sector are talking about right now. How do we pivot during a pandemic? How in the world are we going to pivot and be hybrid post-pandemic? So we thought he would be an inspirational artist to talk about. We also wanted to have this talk because in the galleries right now is an exhibition organized by my colleague from the school, John Grieg. John, if you could raise your hand so everybody knows who you are on the call. A great colleague and of all of ours in the museum. And he curated the show, Wharton Esherick, An Artistic Legacy Through Necessity. And that show was cut short, like all of our exhibitions, when we closed the museum March 13th in order to protect our staff, our audiences, our faculty, and our students. So John is going to talk about the project for about 10 minutes with a PowerPoint that I'll moderate. And then John and I are joined by two of our colleagues from the Wharton Esherick Museum, Julie Siglin, the executive director, who's down here on my Brady Bunch screen. She has great plants. She has great plants behind her on her camera. And Emily Zilber, our director of curatorial affairs and strategic partnerships at the Wharton Esherick Museum. Emily, there you are.
Hi, everyone.
And they're going to chime in after John gives his PowerPoint and give their particular point of view. We're wanting to really explore what this means for artists to pivot in times of change, in times of opportunity, and times of national and international trauma. So John, if I bring up the PowerPoint and share my screen, are you ready to roll? And we want to unmute John. Abby, can you help me do that, or can I do that?
I think I did it.
Oh, you did it. Oh, okay.
Am I coming through?
And Abby, I think you're not allowing me to share my screen.
All right, one second.
Sure. Tell me when you're ready.
Yep.
Okay.
There we go.
This should just take a minute. So John, I'm going to start the slideshow, and just let me know when you'd like to change to the next slide.
Okay, will do. Welcome, everybody. The thing that interested me most about Wharton Esherick was his unique road to success. How there were a few unexpected turns in his path, but at each shift in direction, he faced the challenge as an artist, being creative and expressive, being a problem solver. Esherick was brought up in a house of business folks and had to fight pretty hard to get to art school with his father. He studied painting at PAFA from 1908 to 1910. He left PAFA about 6 weeks from graduation because he felt like he was ready to kind of strike out on his own. He painted in the American Impressionist style of Mary Cassatt and William Merritt Chase, a style popular at the time here. After school, he was a freelance illustrator for different periodicals around Philadelphia until he landed a well-paying job at RCA in Camden, right across the river. He would redraw photographs for silkscreen advertising posters. He On returning from his honeymoon after a few years at RCA, he learned he had lost his job due to the invention of photo transfer process in lithography printing. He then had to do a pivot and turn to woodblock illustrations of poetry and children's books for higher end, oh yes, next slide, for higher end small print, small run books. Here you can see an example of one of his woodcuts. This woodcut is in the show with two other beautiful woodcuts. Next slide. He moved to a small farm in Melbourne, PA to start a family. Here he continues his pursuit of oil painting, but to limited success. He starts to make his own frames with the decoratively carved borders like you see here. His artist friends took an interest in those frames more than they did his paintings and wanted him to make their frames. From here, wood becomes his primary medium, balancing between sculpture and furniture from this point on. He finds this path closing in on 40 years old, so it comes to him a little later in life. His first furniture pieces were highly sculptural, like this one in the slide here, crystalline-like, influenced by German Expressionism at this point, and the architectural work of educator and philosopher Rudolf Steiner was of great interest to him. Next slide, please. His style and influences would change as time went by. Here is a light and airy dining room set from the 40s, built in a more Danish modern vein, kind of a little Art Nouveau-y, but very different from the last slide you saw. And you'll see a change in style as he goes on. The next slide, please. Always hungry for more artistically and economically as his family was growing, Wharton expanded his work beyond furniture into building spaces and interior design. Here you see the Bach House music room, which was disassembled and moved to the PMA, where you can see most of this room on display now. It was demolished back in 1989. But here he's doing really big interior build-out work. And at the Bach House, he also did exterior work on the chimney and took his unique idea of design and unified each room with elements that were handmade and built in place. Next slide, please. Here you see an interior shot of the studio and home he built in Melbourne. This is just one small shot of it. It is a place that is packed full of Esherick. You can see how naturally his many artistic interests flow from painting to printmaking, sculpture to furniture, and finally architecture. His ideas and creative problem solving are seen throughout this house. The stairwell leading up to a split level is amazing. If you haven't visited this one, it's one of the best in the area. You really get a sense of who he was when you go there. I take my wood studio class here every year, and it's always an inspiration to them. They're talking about it after they leave for quite a while. Next slide, please.
Okay, hold on one sec.
Now we're getting into the PAFA show, the pieces that we have brought almost exclusively from the Esherick Museum. Right here is a 4-poster bed that Esherick made for his son Peter in 1927. You can see that here again, he's influenced by another style, Art Deco. It also shows his love of built-in and hidden storage. This beauty is not able to be seen at the museum right now because it's a pretty big piece and they have such limited space. But I really enjoy being able for PAFA to be able to show this piece. Next slide. This is a a later piece in the show is Esherick's personal fold-out desk from 1958 with an array of flat files and drawers. This desk is really one of the gems of the Esherick Museum. Being able to be right close to his personal desk where he did all his drawings and paid the bills from this desk. As we were going through it and moving it from there, we found a few old bills sitting in those flat files. In front, you see the 3-footed stool, of which he made about 300, each unique, hand-built, and only $150 at the time. I'm going to say one of the main reasons we put this exhibit together was to highlight the unique paths to success an artist can take that don't necessarily include a string of sold-out gallery shows. And I think Wharton was really special because he found success in the art world by taking a path outside of it. He was kind of run into dead ends with his painting career and at RCA, and always took whatever was in front of him and figured out how to engage it in an artistic manner and how to pay the bills with skills as an artist and as a creative person. And I for one, was really thankful that he didn't make it as a painter and he had to go this way as a woodworker. And what this show wanted, this show is put on in the studio in the Gallery of Fine Arts area, which is run by the school. So this is kind of directed at a lot at students. So we wanted to show those different paths to students. And we also highlighted 5 alumni who tended to take a different path outside of school. Here you see Tom Pontone's cement pieces, which are rooted in his sculptural practice, but are made for his design company, Studio Noon. In the next slide is another artist, Ben Jones, who was a printing major at PAFA and went on to study textile design and fashion at Philadelphia University, which somehow is now called Thomas Jefferson University. He's currently putting together his own line of clothes. And when the show reopens, I hope you can come and buy a bag from him down in the museum shop. So really, what I'm excited about this show is showing different avenues to success, different ways you can count on, that you can count success. Because I think a lot of times when people leave art school, in their head, there's like 1 or 2 paths. And we all have to be ready to kind of move one way or another and use the skills we have to make it. And I'll turn it back over to you, Brooke.
John, thank you. It's so great to start the day with those images. And I want to continue kind of referencing those images with Julie and Emily, who I've lost on my screen. But Julie, can you unmute yourself? And one of the things that we were talking about when we were preparing for this morning was that Wharton Esherick really had a way of thinking of everything as a work of art and that nothing was unavailable to him, which is perhaps one reason why he was so able to shift and turn left and right throughout his life. Do you want to say a little something about that and respond to John?
Sure. And I'm going to share my screen because I grabbed a few images just to underline a theme I want to just chat real briefly about. And then I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful curator, Emily, to explore that in a little bit more of a contemporary context. But let me just bring up my PowerPoint for you. Oops, hang on. There we go. Are we good with that? We can all see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So when we think about pivoting, and a lot of us, I joke with my board president that I've used that word more in the last 2 months than in my entire life, and I hope to never say it again after we turn this corner. When we think about pivoting, we think about circumstantial reasons for that. So your artwork isn't selling when you paint things, but when you hand carve frames, they're selling. So that causes you to pivot. But something I take away from Esherick in his sensibility, his approach to life and his work is that he allowed himself to pivot through discovery. The people that came in and out of his life, the ideas that came in and out of his life. And uniquely, I think what gives him such a strong voice is that he took in all of that discovery and he put it back out in a body of work that remained true to his own style, even as it absorbed all these things. But he grew up in a as John mentioned, his parents were in upper middle class. His father was a banker. He comes into the world around the turn of the century. So all of these things mean that his upbringing was, there were expectations, deeply rooted expectations. You would go to college, you would probably go into the industry your family was in, you would dress a certain way, you would marry, and you would follow all these particular rules, probably stuffy outfits, etc. And Esherick had something in him always that was brought out through discovery, through the people in his life. Letty was one of them, his wife. They had a vision together when they first were married. They referred to it as an organic lifestyle. They wanted to shrug off all of these, the rote learning that they had come through. They wanted something different for their children. They wanted to embrace nature. Nature was a huge piece of what caused Esherick to pivot. This image that we're looking at now is a giant cherry tree. You don't find trees this big in Pennsylvania or the world anymore. And when they were shopping for their first home, Esherick saw this property with this tree and said to the realtor, I don't even need to see the inside, I'm going to change it anyway, but I love that tree. So fittingly, his home, which heavily influenced the direction that he went, was chosen because of this magnificent cherry tree. And then, whoops. Here is the actual house. This is Sunnycrest, where they began living in 1913, embracing as they went along. These were city kids. They didn't know anything about farming. They were literally learning as they went. Here they are looking young and happy and adorable. This is a woodcut that Esherick did for a book called Yokohama Garland, by a series of poems by A.A. Coppard. And it just shows a person plowing, just as a way of illustrating that Esherick really embraced nature and organic sensibilities. He was a big admirer of the Pennsylvania farmers that he got to know. Something wonderful about Esherick is he was as close with Theodore Dreiser as he was a local farmer with almost no education. He thought farmers were very pragmatic and excellent problem solvers. And absorbing that into his approach to his life and his work allowed him to, and I think Emily is going to touch on this a little bit more in a second, allowed him to continue that discovery of his artwork through problem solving. Here they are under their grape arbor. It looks like springtime, things are starting to emerge from the ground, so that's fitting now. And then this is the dining room in the museum, and I have to say, I just look forward so much to the day when I can invite you all back in to this space. I miss doing that very, very much. But this is the dining room if you haven't been there before. And what you're looking at is the first addition to what was his working studio, circa 1926. This edition is 1940. He's literally enveloped himself in wood. He's fallen completely in love with this medium, this organic, natural medium that probably entered into his head in a large way with that cherry tree. And the cherry tree is present in this room. The wall panels and the ceiling boards are actually from that cherry tree, which somewhat poetically fell ill and died around the time he was transitioning from the farmhouse up to the studio. So pivoting into nature and incorporating it in everything that he produced and how he lived was a big theme throughout Esherick's life. And I'm gonna stop my share screen, and I'm gonna let Emily take that idea and apply it to some contemporary thinking, as she is so good at doing.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you're with us today. It's such a wonderful turnout, and I'll echo Julie's sentiments that we can't wait to invite you to the house in person, hopefully in the near future. I'm going to ask Brooke to bring up the PowerPoint again.
Oh, sure.
But I want to say that one of the things that was so exciting to us at the Esherick Museum about working on this with PAFA, about loaning some of these objects that haven't left the studio in a very long time, or in the case of many, have never left the studio, is the relationship that John was able to create with this, the sensibility of Esherick, pivoting throughout his life, problem solving, and the way that young artists think and the inspiration that they can draw from an artist like Esherick. I would encourage you, if you want to sort of see more of that before you have a chance to get back to PAFA and see the exhibition, we have a really wonderful series on our social media called Creatives on Esherick, where we've asked contemporary makers, furniture makers, we'll have one coming up with a chef very soon, to talk about how the example of Esherick's work, whether it's the objects themselves or the pivoting, has inspired them in different ways. So Brooke, I'm sorry, if you mind going back to the print at the beginning.
Of course. I love that image, this one.
Yes, it's a fabulous image. And so, you know, I want to talk a little bit about, with some more specifically about some of these objects that hopefully you'll have a chance to come and see, and the exact pivots that Esherick made. So we're looking at a print that was made in 1929 on his second visit to an artist colony of Fairhope, Alabama. And it's in Fairhope that Esherick started working with wood tools for the first time. So this is a situation where Esherick went with his family to paint, to be around a lot of other people who are interested in progressive education, in various factors of the arts. He acquired his first wood carving tools when he was there, indeed, to create frames for his prints. And I want you to look at this piece. This is Alabama pine. So this wonderful elongated image of a tree and these beautiful pine needles. And then Brooke, if you can move to the next. And we're looking here at a painting that was actually done during his first visit 10 years earlier to Fairhope. So a much earlier piece in his work, but it's interesting to see how he's taken this one theme, this notion of the pine trees, and you can look around the edge of the frame here and you'll see pine needles. He often carved his frames to reflect the content of the images that he was painting. And so this notion of Esherick thinking about a total work of art, which the studio very much is. I often think of a line that the architect Eliel Saarinen used to describe the way he thought about city planning, that it was everything from the cigarette case to the building design. For Esherick, art is everything. And so you don't get to a print like Alabama Pines, which is made from a carved wooden block, unless you are carving these frames. You're sort of seeing the relationship between a wood block and a frame, right? That you're having to do the same action, but in two different ways. But it allowed his expression to just grow in really, really compelling ways. By 1925, which is only, you know, several years after this painting was done, Esherick had given up this way of working completely, saying, if I can't paint like Esherick, I can at least sculpt like Esherick. And I would throw wood blocks into sculpting, right? That is it's a mode of making things in 3 dimensions. So Brooke, if we can then go to the cabinet desk.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
The one in the show?
The one in the show, yep. Yeah.
Here you go.
So this is a fantastic piece. I encourage you not only to go see it at PAFA, but also to come back to the studio to see it. This is actually the first time that it ever, that it left the studio since the late 1950s was to come to PAFA. So it's a piece that's near and dear to our hearts. I think about this as an example of pivoting because this remarkable piece of furniture was actually something that was made for a fairly utilitarian purpose. It was meant to be a substitute for his magnificent carved drop leaf desk from the late 1920s, which you can see on the Esherick's website in our collections highlights section. I'd encourage people to go there and explore after the talk if they're interested in learning more about the museum's collection. His desk was going off to the Museum of Contemporary Craft, which is now the Museum of Arts and Design, in 1958 for what was the museum's first major solo retrospective of a living artist. He would no longer have a workspace. He whipped up this beautifully utilitarian desk, although it doesn't not seem that way to us now. But it was full of problems that had to be solved, including, and it's difficult, you can't see it in this image, but I encourage you to come back and visit it at the Esherick Museum, because when you come to us, you'll be able to see that when the top drawers are opened, lights are actually built into the piece to illuminate the workspace. Something inspired by the technology behind refrigerator lights. Esherick started incorporating lighting into his objects in the 1930s, and so an idea that carried through. So in order to just make something that fit in his space that allowed him to get his work done, he ends up building this piece that when the curator from the Museum of Contemporary Crafts came to look at the work and decide what was going to be in the show, he said, this is the piece that's coming to the show, which is the last time, of course, that the piece left the studio. So you never know, even when you're trying to create a utilitarian substitute, if you do it in such a way where your whole practice is a part of a singular voice, it allows you to move so quickly between all different kinds of making. And this is a really, really great example of that kind of work. I will say, if you're interested in learning more about that exhibition, the American Craft Council has amazing online archives, including the catalog and checklist for that show in 1958. You can go to their website, but you can also go to our website. In our Explore tab, we've listed a whole page of resources, and there's a link directly to it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily and Julie and John. I just want to check in with everyone because we love to have a morning conversation. Abby, maybe you can help me since there are multiple screens. Does anybody have any questions for our speakers or comments about Esherick and the project that John put together?
Yeah, Brooke, and I also realized in my intro, I didn't mention about how we ask people to raise their hand. I always miss something, but so I do want to reiterate or say for the first time that we want to hear from you. You can drop things in the chat, or if you click on the participant button at the bottom of your screen, on the right-hand side, it pops up where it says raise hand. And so when you do that, we'll be able to see as hosts and we'll call on people that way. But we do already have one question in the chat from someone who had to leave a little early, but is going to check us out on YouTube later. And they wanted to know if he was influenced by Rudolf Steiner. Yeah, so I think any connection between that artist and Esherick, if there is one.
Emily, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. So Rudolf Steiner, the philosopher, known, maybe best known for Waldorf education. I don't know if folks here have kids who are connected to Waldorf schools, but I think that may be the way that Steiner shows up in our lives today most often, unless, as Julie let me know, you use Weleda Skincare, which is a company that Steiner was involved in. Steiner had ideas about organic architecture, the way that things should look as though they are growing, that they are changing, that there is there's a genesis in nature. Mark Spheri, who is a wonderful friend of the museum, woodworker, has an excellent article from the Journal of Modern Craft on Esherick's relationship with Rudolf Steiner, and I would encourage you all to take a look at that if you're interested in reading more deeply.
And I think that John's PowerPoint so beautifully illustrated his influence with Cubism and German Expressionism as well. I see those indicated in a lot of his, the artist's work. I think we have 2 raised hands. Abby, where are they?
I will call, Kelly, I saw your hand first, so let me lower your hand and you're unmuted. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that my father was Wharton's doctor, and I grew up going there very, very often. And I have a lot of his stuff, very fortunately. And as far as paying his bills, he always paid my father in woodcuts, tools, or something. So I'm very, very lucky.
Kelly, thank you so much for that. I hope that you would be in contact with us. We would love to collect a brief oral history from you.
Okay, well, I'm around.
Kelly, where
Thank
are
you.
you located?
In New York.
You're in New York? Okay, good.
Yeah.
And Julie, can she find your email online?
Yes,
Well, I am
right on the website. you'll be able
He
to.
arrived at my wedding carrying a stool wrapped in brown paper with peonies sticking out of it. And
We're all getting very
said to
jealous.
Sue and Ted. So I'm very lucky to have known
Oh,
you.
you just
did.
made my month, Kelly.
Yeah. Was it one of the three-legged stools, Kelly, that John illustrated in his PowerPoint?
Yes, I have 3 of them, but one has my name on it.
Oh, how beautiful.
That's wonderful.
Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Okay.
Glad you were able to join the call.
Thanks, Kelly. And then we have another, I can see Elamar Richardson. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I have a similar question to the Steiner one, I guess, which is I'm wondering about the connection to the school in Rose Valley. I'm a graduate of the school in Rose Valley, and of course we had one of the horses, we still do, one of the horses there, as they did also across the street at Hedgerow. And the nature and the sort of freedom, the liberty that was so important to Esherick and his wife. I wonder if anyone here can say a little bit if there's any other connections with Rose Valley or the founders of Rose Valley or anything like that. Meaning the school, the elementary school.
Julie or Emily, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure, I'll start, and then Emily, if you want to expand on it. Esherick was heavily involved with the Hedgerow Theater, located in Rose Valley, still producing plays today. He paid for drama lessons for his daughter with hammer handle chairs. That was just one piece of connectivity. He did set pieces, he did their woodcuts for their subscriptions, and he also drew incredible influence from the theater. It was another one of these discovery pieces that allowed him to see a different way of being than that of his upbringing. And he really thought that theater was a magnificent source of inspiration that you see in his work. So Rose Valley was also a place where studio furniture was being produced as well. So there's that connection. And Emily, do you want to expand on that idea a little?
That I'm sorry, I'm trying to write in somebody in chat.
You're chatting and writing and talking and drinking
Remind
coffee.
me the last thing you just said.
We do have quite a few questions in the chat, but since we only have a couple minutes, I'd like to get to a couple of them. And we have one question that keeps coming up about a person's whole practice revolves around a voice, or someone was asking about if the singular voice is the wood. I'm
happy to talk to that. That was actually, I was about typing a response back. So when I say that, Esherick had a consistent voice. It looked different in different time periods. It looked different depending on who he was in conversation with, what he was looking at, what kinds of supplies he had to work with, what kinds of resources he had to work with. But across everything that he made, and a practice that was really diverse and didn't just include wood and furniture, but included the prints, included other kinds of designs, included furniture, included commissions. There's a singular voice that comes through that. And so when I talk about Esherick's whole practice as a total work of art, he's thinking and applying the same approach, regardless of how he is expressing that, whether through a particular medium or not. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you. And then
there's also a question on here, Abby, if I can, about Nakashima. And I'm just wondering, for those of us who might be a little bit newer to this region and to Esherick and his career, could you tie the two together if there's a knot to be made? John, do you want to tackle that one?
Ooh.
Or do I want to, or maybe Emily, do you have?
Julie, well, I'll actually hand this one over to Julie, I think.
Okay.
Brooke, I'm sorry, I was typing a response in the chat. Could you just recap your question? Apologies.
Just so that we all acknowledge all these multitasking professionals this morning. We're all, and they have kids and cats in the behind the locked doors too. So I know how busy everybody is. I was just wondering, for those of us who are less familiar with Wharton Esherick, I'm sure there's some on the call who maybe aren't as familiar with the craft traditions and furniture traditions in this region. Is there a knot to be tied between Nakashima and Esherick, or isn't there?
Absolutely. I think there is. And I happen to have seen that we have someone on the call who might want to speak to that. I'm not sure if she would like to, but I'll go ahead and say, Mira, would you like to chime in?
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't have.
Hey, there she is.
Hi.
Hi, John.
I don't have any. I don't have any proof that Dad actually met Wharton, except on one occasion. And he said in the middle of the day, Wharton had come over to visit, and Dad was busy working, and Wharton walked in, and he was 3 feet to the wind because he had a lot of cocktails for lunch. So Dad had not much respect for him. And I think that's as far as it goes. My husband, John, here is a relative of the Eshericks, and we're also interested in the fact that he was not only interested in wood and art and painting and sculpture and that sort of thing, but also in music and dance and theater.
And architecture.
And
they had in common, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mira and John, it's just such a privilege to have you joining us this morning. Thank you so much for taking the call. How are you doing up there with your public space, and how are you thinking about coming back to the public that loves visiting you?
Actually, I am liking the peace and quiet. Thank you very much. We don't know when we will be able to open to the public. But, we're trying to figure out how we can open the shop little by little and have people distanced from each other and taking work home and working remotely when necessary. So we're only looking forward to the yellow phase.
Right.
I don't know when the green phase will happen, but not anytime soon.
Right. Are your colleagues still making and building offsite, or is that a little bit paused as well right now?
No, they are. They've been, most of them have been keeping busy this whole shutdown. They come and pick up materials and take them home and work on them.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, it's just lovely to see you. It's great to have you here this morning.
Oh, thank you so much. It's fun.
Abby, any more calls before we, or any more questions before we think about thanking everyone? We have a few more minutes, everyone. We do like to honor our timeline. This is a brief coffee break to our day. It's been an awfully vivid one. I'm enjoying it immensely. I hope everyone else is too.
Yeah, it's hard to pick because there's so many. This is like one of the best chats I think we've ever had. There's so many helpful links. Thank you all so much for your comments. There's one question that's sort of earlier on about his relationship with Louis Kahn, and I wondered if that would be something nice to kind of tie it up today.
So maybe that will be the last response. Who, Emily or Julie? Emily or Julie?
I think we can tag team this, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, just for context, Esherick needed space as his client base grew and the size of his furniture and furnishings, and he had outgrown his studio space, which was also serving as his home by this point. So in 1956, through George Howe, he was connected with Lou Kahn. And at that point, when he built the studio, it was the Wild West of constructing whatever you wanted to construct on your property. But in 56, Tredyffrin Township was requiring permits and architectural drawings, which is why Kahn became involved. And stylistically, you would think on the surface, the two men were pretty antithetical, but when as the way they approached their work was very, very similar. And currently the workshop has served as the private residence of Wharton's son-in-law and his daughter up until her passing in 2015. It will eventually be part of the public access, the campus. In fact, we had been wrapping up a campus planning process literally 3 days before we closed the museum. So it was very gutting for all of us, but there will be more news on that front when we turn that corner. It's a magnificent building. It's highly singular for both Esherick and Kahn's work. And I'll let Emily expand on what she thinks.
I'll also, I'll just note to everyone that in the chat section here, I've put a link to, because we consider our collections objects, not just the objects that are within the house, but also the buildings in our care. And so one of the highlights is indeed the studio building. I've linked there to the entry for that space, which gives you a little bit more context and also takes you out to Kahn's architectural archives. And I see that somebody mentioned the Margaret Esherick house. links to information about the preservation and images of that space if you want to delve a little deeper. There's incredible information that can go way beyond our 45 minutes here. So I encourage you to take a look.
And Emily and Julie, we share the common goal of not only taking care of and conserving and researching and exhibiting objects, but also architecture.
Yes.
And at PAFA, of course, we have a huge responsibility with our Frank Furness building, the historic landmark building. So we all share that, where we are object focused and architectural focus, and focused on all of you. Emily, Julie, thank you so much for joining John and me this morning. John, that was a terrific way to start the day. We all hope, the three of us hope, that we'll be able to invite you to PAFA and the Wharton Esherick Museum later this summer. If you are wanting to be updated about the possibility of visiting John's show, the other shows at PAFA and the Wharton Esherick Museum, sign up for our newsletters. We're sending out regular newsletters to communicate with our audiences, or become a member. And join us again. Abby, thank you so much for organizing this talk this morning. Everybody be safe, be careful, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Hope to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Yep. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Much.
Abby, do we save the